The night my name disappeared from the company email system, I was still sitting at my desk. That was the first thing that told me something was wrong. Not the silence, not the way conversations died when I walked past the glass offices. It was the simple fact that my inbox refreshed and my address bounced back like I had never existed. I stared at the screen fingers hovering over the keyboard and felt that familiar tightening in my chest, the kind that comes when you realize the ground under you has shifted and no one bothered to warn you. If you are listening to this while folding laundry or driving home or sitting alone with a cup of coffee, let me ask you something. Have you ever watched your life get quietly rewritten while you were still standing in it? I had just turned 32. I had spent 12 years building a career at Fairwell & Knox, a mid-sized estate planning firm outside of Charleston, South Carolina. Not glamorous, not flashy, but solid. The kind of place older clients trusted with their wills, their family businesses, their inheritance disputes. The kind of work that required patience, memory, and discretion. The kind of work women like me were expected to do quietly and gratefully. That evening was supposed to be ordinary. I had stayed late to finish preparing documents for a holiday wedding. December always brought an avalanche of revisions. Couples getting married before Christmas, parents rewriting wills, adult children circling like polite vultures. Outside, the city glowed with soft lights and the smell of pine wreaths and river air. I remember thinking absurdly that I might stop for peppermint ice cream on the way home. That was how normal everything felt. Until I tried to email a draft to my supervisor and the system told me the address did not exist. I stood up slowly and walked to the administrative desk. Carol was still there, her coat folded neatly over the back of her chair. She had worked there longer than anyone, longer even than my boss. She would not look at me. "Hey," I said gently, "is the server down?" Her lips pressed together. She picked up a stack of folders and held them like a shield. "You should talk to Martin." My stomach dropped. Martin Hale, managing partner, 61 years old, perfect hair, a smile that always stopped just short of warmth. He had hired me straight out of graduate school back when I still believed loyalty was mutual. His office door was closed. That had never happened before. I knocked anyway. "Come in," he said. His voice sounded rehearsed. Inside, the lights were low. Another man sat in the chair opposite his desk. Younger, confident posture, one ankle resting on his knee like he belonged there. Evan Brooks, my brother. The sight of him there in that chair in my workplace hit harder than any system error ever could. Evan smiled when he saw me. The same smile he had practiced since childhood. Charming, apologetic, empty. "Hey, Liv," he said. "Did not expect to see you tonight." Martin gestured to the chair beside Evan. "Please sit, Olivia." He used my full name. That was the second sign. I stayed standing. "What is this?" I asked. Martin folded his hands. "We have made some decisions regarding the firm's direction. Structural changes." Evan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "This is not personal." That was the third sign. I laughed once, sharp and humorless. "You disabled my email. That feels personal." Martin cleared his throat. "Effective immediately, you are being placed on administrative leave." "On what grounds?" I asked. He glanced at Evan, just a flicker, just enough. Evan took over smoothly. "There have been concerns about boundaries, about confidentiality." The word landed like a slap. "Whose concerns?" I asked. Martin sighed the way men do when they want to look tired rather than guilty. "We received recordings." My heart started to pound. "Recordings of what?" Evan reached into his jacket and placed his phone on the desk. "Of you," he said softly. "Discussing client estates, talking about redirecting assets, questioning family intentions." I stared at the phone like it might bite me. "That is impossible," I said. "I would never—" Martin tapped the desk. "The audio is compelling." Compelling. As if truth were a matter of tone. I shook my head. "Play it." Evan hesitated, just a beat too long. Then he pressed the screen. My voice filled the room. Not mine, but close enough to steal my breath. It had my cadence, my pauses, even the slight rasp I get when I'm tired. It spoke calmly about a client's will, about influencing outcomes, about teaching families lessons they deserved. I felt like I was sinking through the floor. "That is not me," I whispered. Martin's expression did not change. "We have to protect the firm." Evan stood. "I tried to tell them you have been under a lot of stress. Dad's health, Mom's finances. You have always been intense." There it was, the pivot, the reframing. I looked at my brother. Really looked at him. He was wearing the watch our father had given him the year he dropped out of college. The one Dad said was an investment in his future. I had received a thank you card that year. Nothing else. "You did this," I said quietly. Evan's smile faded just enough to look sincere. I am trying to clean up a mess before it gets worse. Martin stood. Security will escort you out. The word security echoed in my ears. I built half your client retention system, I said. I trained your associates. I stayed when everyone else left. Martin avoided my eyes. You will be contacted by counsel. That was it. No discussion, no investigation, no presumption of innocence. I walked out carrying my purse and nothing else. Carol stood and watched me pass, tears in her eyes, hands clasped like she wanted to say something but was afraid. The elevator ride down felt endless. Outside, the cold air slapped my face. Christmas lights blinked. Somewhere nearby, someone laughed. I stood on the sidewalk, staring at the reflection of the building that had just erased me. My phone buzzed. A message from my mother. Your brother says you are upset. He told us everything. We will talk later. Please do not cause trouble. I sat in my car and laughed until my hands shook. Everything. He told them everything. That night, alone in my apartment, I replayed the audio again and again. I listened for cracks, for seams. There was a faint artificial smoothness beneath it all, something wrong enough to make my skin crawl. I knew then this was not just about my job. This was inheritance, control, a narrative being written where I was the problem. And if my brother thought silence would finish me, he had forgotten something important. I had spent my career listening closely to what people said when they thought no one was paying attention, and I was about to listen to him. The first night after I was escorted out of Farewell and Knox, I did not sleep. I sat on the edge of my bed with my laptop open, the glow of the screen lighting the familiar cracks in the ceiling I had memorized over the years. That apartment had always felt temporary, a place I stayed, because I assumed the real security was elsewhere. My job, my reputation, my family name. All three were suddenly unstable. I replayed the recording Evan had played in Martin's office, this time through decent headphones. Alone, focused. The way I listened to witness statements when clients swore they were telling the truth. The voice sounded like me, the way a mirror in bad lighting looks like you. Close enough to fool someone who wanted to believe it, but wrong in ways that mattered. The breath timing was off. The pauses were too clean. I noticed a subtle flattening at the end of sentences, a synthetic smoothness where my voice usually frays. It was stitched, modeled, built. Someone had engineered it. My hands clenched into my lap as realization settled. This was not an impulsive betrayal. This was preparation. I closed the audio file and leaned back, staring at the ceiling again. A memory surfaced uninvited. Thanksgiving, 3 years earlier. Evan sitting at my kitchen table, swirling wine in his glass, asking casual questions about my cases. Who handled the trusts? Which clients were volatile? What software we used for recordings? I had answered without thinking. Because he was my brother. Because we grew up believing blood meant safety. I should have known better. My phone buzzed again. Another message from my mother. Your father is very disappointed. Evan says you have been struggling for a while. He says you need rest. Rest, the polite word families use when they want you quiet. I typed and deleted a dozen replies before setting the phone face down. If I answered now, I would defend myself. And defense was what Evan expected. He needed me emotional, reactive, unstable. Instead, I opened a new folder on my laptop and labeled it simply Timeline. If he had built a lie, it had a structure, and structures leave traces. I started with the basics. Dates, conversations, emails. Every time Evan had asked about my work. Every time he had checked in after my grandmother passed, after Dad's first hospitalization, after Mom's money worries became harder to hide. Patterns emerged quickly once I stopped telling myself they were coincidences. Evan had never been interested in my life until it intersected with assets. The next morning I drove to my parents' house. Not to confront them, not yet. To observe. The house looked the same. Trim hedges. American flag hanging slightly crooked like it always had. Inside, my mother was already moving around the kitchen, overbusy clattering dishes too loudly. She startled when she saw me. Oh, she said, you should have called. I replied calmly. She glanced toward the den where my father sat in his recliner, the television on, but muted. Evan stood near the window, coffee in hand, relaxed, at home. You should not be here, Mom said quietly. Things are tense. Because of what he told you, I said. Evan turned, concern etched carefully on his face. Liv, please, this is not helping. My father finally spoke without looking at me. Your brother is worried about you. There it was again, the language of concern used as a weapon. I nodded. I imagine he is. I watched Evan closely. He did not interrupt. He wanted to appear reasonable. That told me he thought he was winning. I asked my mother if I could see the will. Her hands froze on the counter. What? Grandma's updated will, I said. The one you said she changed before she died. My father shifted. That was handled. By whom, I asked. Evan answered smoothly. A colleague of mine. Someone I trust. Of course it was. I would like a copy, I said. Silence stretched. My mother's voice trembled. Why are you doing this after everything? Because everything you believe right now depends on paperwork, I said evenly. And paperwork can be forged. Evan laughed softly, like I had told a sad joke. You are spiraling. I met his eyes. You disabled my email before presenting evidence. Why? He blinked. Just once. Procedure, he said. That is not procedure, I replied. That is containment. My father stood abruptly. Enough, you are upsetting your mother. I looked at them, all three of them, and understood something painful and clarifying. They were afraid of instability more than injustice. Evan was offering them certainty. A story where the problem was me and the solution was distance. They were clinging to it like a life raft. I left without another word. In my car, my hands shook, but my mind felt strangely clear. I no longer needed their approval to move forward. I needed leverage. That afternoon, I called an old client. Not about her case. About her son who worked in digital forensics for a federal contractor. I did not accuse, I asked questions. By evening, I had a meeting set for the next day. His name was Marcus. He listened without interrupting as I played the recording. He frowned within seconds. This is synthesized, he said. Not perfect, but good enough for lay ears. Can you prove it, I asked. Yes, he said. And more importantly, we can trace the model. My pulse quickened. The voice had to be trained, he continued. That requires source material, hours of clean audio. I thought of Evan's phone, of his casual habit of recording family dinners, of his podcast experiments he claimed were harmless. How long would it take, I asked. Depends how deep you want to go, Marcus said. But if someone used this against you professionally, they were not careful enough. When I got home, I found an envelope taped to my door. Inside was a printed notice from Fairwell & Knox's legal counsel. Administrative leave pending investigation. Confidentiality clause. Non-disparagement reminder. At the bottom, a handwritten note in Evan's familiar slanted script. We can still fix this if you stop digging. I folded the paper carefully and placed it in the timeline folder. He was nervous. That night, as I lay in bed staring into the dark, another realization settled in heavier than the rest. This was not just about my career, my grandmother's estate, my parents' house, the family business Dad had quietly transferred shares of to Evan over the years. I had been excluded long before I was erased. The voice recording was not the crime, it was the cover. And Evan had underestimated one thing. Women my age learn patience the hard way. We learn to wait to watch to gather proof while everyone assumes we are emotional. By the time he realized I was not spiraling, I would already be standing where he could not reach me. By the third morning, the shock had burned off. What remained was something colder and more deliberate. I woke before sunrise, not from anxiety, but from clarity, the kind that comes when you finally stop hoping people will do the right thing and start planning as if they will not. I brewed coffee and sat at the small kitchen table with my laptop open, the timeline folder glowing like a quiet promise. Marcus had sent a message overnight. I can meet this afternoon. Bring everything. Everything was the problem. Because once I started pulling threads, the past began to unravel faster than I expected. I drove to my parents' house again, this time parking a block away. Not to go inside, to watch. Evan left around 9, dressed in a tailored coat, keys in hand, confident stride. He waved at my mother through the window. She waved back. I waited until his car disappeared, then walked up and knocked. My mother opened the door with visible hesitation. Olivia, she said softly. You should not... I am not here to argue, I said. I need to see Grandma's papers. Her eyes flicked toward the hallway like someone checking for witnesses. Then she stepped aside. The living room smelled like lemon cleaner and old upholstery. Comfort, familiarity. The kind of environment where difficult conversations are quietly buried. My father sat at the dining table sorting mail. She is here to upset you again, he said without looking up. I'm here because someone lied, I replied. He sighed deeply. Your brother has always looked out for this family. That sentence told me everything. I followed my mother into the study. She pulled open a filing cabinet and retrieved a folder, her hands shaking slightly. This is what Evan gave us, she said. I opened it slowly. At first glance, it looked legitimate. Correct formatting, proper notarization, signatures where they belonged. Too perfect. I scanned the dates, the witnesses, the notary stamp. Then I saw it. The notary commission number belonged to someone whose license had expired the year before my grandmother died. My pulse jumped. Mom, I said carefully, did Grandma ever mention changing her will? My mother hesitated. She said she trusted Evan. Of course she did. He visited every Sunday. He brought groceries. He fixed things around the house. He told her stories about protecting the family. He had rehearsed that role his whole life. "I need to borrow this," I said. My father finally looked up. "Absolutely not." "I will return it," I said. "But if this is forged, you need to know." He slammed his hand on the table. "Enough. You have lost your job. You are under investigation. You do not get to tear this family apart." I met his eyes. "It is already torn. You just chose the side that looked calm." My mother swallowed hard, but said nothing as I slipped the folder into my bag. In the car, I felt the first flicker of something like hope, not relief, hope sharpened by anger. At noon, I met Marcus in a quiet office tucked above a coffee shop. No signage, no small talk. He plugged in my drive and listened to the recording again this time, watching data streams scroll across his screen. "This was generated using a consumer-grade voice modeling platform," he said. "But the training set is extensive." He paused. "Whoever did this had long-term access to your voice." I told him about Evan's habit of recording family gatherings, about his so-called podcast. Marcus nodded. "We can prove that. Metadata leaves fingerprints." He pulled up waveforms side by side. My real voice from a conference panel years earlier. The fake one. "See here," he said. "The cadence is copied, but the emotional variance is flattened. It lacks micro-instability." I stared at the screen. "So this is not just opinion." "No," he said. "This is evidence." The words settled in my chest like armor. By mid-afternoon, Marcus had traced the model's origin to an account registered under a Shell email. But the payment trail was sloppier. It led back to a business credit card. My brother's. I closed my eyes slowly. "How far do you want to take this?" Marcus asked. "All the way," I said. He nodded. "Then you should prepare for retaliation." As if summoned by the word, my phone buzzed. "Evan." I let it ring. Then again. Finally a text. "We need to talk. You are making things worse." I forwarded it to Marcus. That, he said, is fear. By evening, the first formal report was drafted. Preliminary but solid. Synthetic voice manipulation. Intent to deceive. Professional harm. "This will not just clear your name," Marcus said. "It will expose motive." I drove home under a sky streaked with pink and gray, my mind racing ahead to consequences. Evan would not surrender quietly. That night, my mother called. "I found something," she whispered. My stomach tightened. "What?" "A box," she said. "In the garage. Evan's things. He asked us to store it." My pulse quickened. "What is inside?" "Documents," she said. "Old bank statements, notes." I did not read much. I closed my eyes. The game was shifting. "Do not confront him," I said quickly. "Do not let him know you saw it." She exhaled shakily. "I am scared." "So am I admitted. "But the truth is already moving." After we hung up, I sat in the dark thinking about all the times I had minimized my instincts to keep peace. Peace had never protected me. By the time Evan realized I was not backing down, it would be too late to rewrite the story. He had framed me as unstable. I was about to show him what focus really looked like. The box arrived the next morning. My mother did not bring it herself. She left it on my doorstep like contraband wrapped in a trash bag. The cardboard softened from years of sitting in the garage. When I picked it up, it was heavier than it looked. That weight was not just paper. It was guilt, silence, years of choices no one wanted to name. I carried it inside, locked the door, and set it on the kitchen table. For a moment, I just stood there, hands on the edge, breathing slowly. There was a time in my life when opening something like this would have terrified me. Now it felt inevitable. Inside were folders, envelopes, a leather-bound notebook with Evan's initials pressed into the corner. The first thing I noticed was how organized everything was. Evan liked control. He liked systems that made him feel untouchable. Bank statements came first, not my parents', his. Multiple accounts, different banks, small deposits at first, then larger ones. Money moving in patterns that made my stomach tighten. Transfers that coincided with family events. My grandmother's hospitalization, my father's surgery. The months after the family business needed help. He had not just inserted himself into moments of vulnerability, he had monetized them. I opened the notebook. Dates, names, notes written in his precise handwriting. Mom anxious about bills, offer reassurance. Dad proud, leverage legacy. Olivia distant, monitor. I stopped breathing for a second. Monitor. I read on. There were entries about conversations I remembered differently. Dinners where he played mediator. Phone calls where he supported me after long days at work. Casual questions I had brushed off. All of it logged. All of it intentional. I sank into the chair. This was not a sudden betrayal. This was a long con built on patience and proximity, on being the good son while quietly erasing the daughter who asked questions. My phone buzzed. Marcus again. I sent him photos of the notebook pages. His response came fast. This is motive, this is planning, this is devastating. I closed the notebook carefully and slid it into a folder. By noon, my father called. Your mother told me you took Evan's things, he said, voice tight. I did, I replied. You had no right. I had every right, I said calmly. Those documents explain why my name disappeared from the firm. Silence on the line. You are accusing your brother of something serious, he said finally. I am proving it, I corrected. He exhaled sharply. He has been nothing but loyal to this family. Loyalty does not look like surveillance, I said, or forged documents. His voice hardened. You always see the worst in people. I closed my eyes. No, I just see patterns. He hung up. That afternoon, Evan showed up at my apartment. I did not invite him in. He stood in the hallway, hands in his pockets, posture relaxed like this was a friendly visit. You are scaring Mom, he said. I am not responsible for your lies catching up to you, I replied. He smiled thinly. You really think you can undo years of trust with a few files? I met his gaze. I think you built that trust on sand. His eyes flicked past me, scanning my living room. You look tired. There it was, the script. Concern is not care, I said, and manipulation is not love. His jaw tightened. You are about to burn bridges you cannot rebuild. I stepped closer. You already burned them. I'm just showing where the fire started. For a split second, his composure cracked. You do not understand what I did for this family, he snapped. You were gone. Always working, always judging. I nodded slowly. And you took advantage of that. His face went cold. You have no proof that matters. I smiled then, just slightly. You should stop underestimating people who listen for a living. He stared at me, searching for uncertainty. He did not find it. This ends badly, he said quietly. For you, I replied. He turned and walked away. That evening, Marcus called again. We are ready to move, he said. But once this becomes formal, he will counterattack. I know, I said. Your family will be dragged into it. They already are, I said. They just do not know it yet. We filed the initial report that night. Not public, strategic. Enough to trigger internal reviews at the firm. Enough to freeze decisions. By morning, Farewell and Knox emailed me. Your administrative leave is under reconsideration pending new information. I laughed out loud. Evan called again. This time I answered. You are making a mistake, he said. We can still control this. No, I replied. You controlled it, past tense. You think exposing me fixes everything, he asked. You think Mom and Dad will thank you? I am not doing this for gratitude, I said. I am doing it for truth. He went quiet. You were always too righteous, he said finally. Too sure you were better. I smiled not kindly. No, I was just quieter. After the call, I sat at the table again, staring at the box, at the evidence of years of manipulation. I thought of my grandmother trusting the grandson who visited weekly. I thought of my mother smoothing conflict until she could not see it anymore. I thought of my father mistaking confidence for integrity. Evan had built a story where he was the protector. I was about to show them the cost of that protection. And once the truth surfaced, there would be no editing it away. The first letter arrived on a Thursday morning, slipped under my door like a quiet threat. It was from Farewell and Knox's legal counsel, but the language was different this time. Careful, measured, curious instead of accusatory. They wanted a meeting, not to discipline me, to listen. I sat at my kitchen table with the letter open, the sun cutting across the floor in pale winter stripes, and let myself feel one small, controlled breath of satisfaction. Evan had always believed institutions moved slowly enough for him to stay ahead of them. He counted on people choosing convenience over conflict. He had forgotten that firms built on trust panic when trust is threatened. I called Marcus and read the letter aloud. They are scared, he said. Good, that means we dictate pace. The meeting was set for Monday. Neutral location, 2 partners present, independent counsel, no Evan. That detail mattered more than anything else. Before Monday arrived, the second letter came. This one from my parents' longtime attorney, a man who had drafted documents for our family since I was in college. Subject line clarification regarding recent estate amendments. I closed my eyes. Evan was scrambling. I drove to my parents' house that afternoon unannounced. The driveway was empty. My mother answered the door, looking smaller than I remembered, her sweater sleeves pulled over her hands. You look tired, she said. So do you, I replied gently. She stepped aside without arguing. The kitchen smelled like soup gone untouched. My father sat at the table, papers spread out, glasses perched low on his nose. He looked up when he saw me, and for the first time in weeks, he did not look angry. He looked confused. He never told us, my mother said quietly, as if continuing a conversation I had missed. Told you what I asked. My father slid a document toward me, that the will was changed again. I scanned it quickly. Another amendment, another redistribution, another shift toward Evan. And you signed this, I asked. My mother nodded. He said it was temporary, just to protect the business. The phrase hit like a bell. Protect the business. I set the paper down. Did you read it? She hesitated. He explained it. I took a slow breath. That is not an answer. My father leaned back, rubbing his temples. He said you were too busy to help, that he was stepping in. I felt the familiar ache rise in my chest, but I did not let it show. Did he tell you I was being investigated? I asked. My father nodded. He said there were concerns. And did you ask to see proof? Silence. My mother's eyes filled. He said it would upset us. There it was. The through line. Evan had always positioned himself as the emotional gatekeeper, filtering information, deciding what others could handle. I pulled out my tablet and opened the folder Marcus and I had prepared. I am going to show you something I said, and then you can decide who you trust. I played the synthesized audio first, watched their faces tighten. Then I showed them the analysis, the flattened waveforms, the traced payment. Then the notebook. My mother covered her mouth. My father stared at the handwriting like it was written in a foreign language. He wrote about us, my mother whispered, like entries. Because that is how he thinks, I said. As assets, as variables. My father's voice was rough. Why? I met his eyes. Because he wanted control, and because it worked. The room felt heavy, thick with regret. He said you were jealous, my mother said weakly. I nodded. That was easier than admitting he was afraid of me. They did not argue. That told me more than any apology could. That night, Evan called my father. I heard about it later. The raised voice, the denial, the anger when my father asked for documents Evan could not produce. The cracks were widening. Monday came quickly. The meeting with Farewell and Knox was held in a conference room with no windows. 2 senior partners sat across from me, their expressions guarded but alert. Their counsel took notes. I spoke calmly. I laid out facts. I presented evidence. I did not beg. When I finished, one of the partners leaned back slowly. This changes things, he said. Yes, I replied. It does. Their counsel asked the final question. Do you believe Mr. Brooks acted alone? I paused, just long enough. I believe he relied on people assuming I would not fight back. The meeting ended with promises, reviews, suspensions. When I stepped outside, my phone buzzed. A message from Evan. You crossed a line. I typed back 3 words. You drew it. The next day, the firm reinstated my email. The day after that, Evan's access to internal systems was revoked. He came to my apartment again that evening. This time he did not smile. You think this ends with me losing a few privileges? He said, voice low. I think it ends with you losing control, I replied. You are tearing the family apart, he said. No, I said. I am stopping you from doing it quietly. He leaned in. They will forgive me. Maybe I said, but they will never forget what you wrote about them. That landed. For the first time, Evan looked uncertain. As he left, I felt something shift inside me. Not victory, not yet, but inevitability. The truth was moving faster than he could manage. And once people see who benefited from silence, they start asking why it was so loud in the first place. By the time Evan realized he was losing ground, he stopped pretending this was about concern. He went quiet. That silence was louder than any argument we had ever had. I woke on Tuesday morning to 3 missed calls from unknown numbers and 1 voicemail from my mother that she had not meant to leave. Her voice was shaky mid-sentence like she had hit record without realizing it. He is angry, she said to someone else. I have never seen him like this. I did not call her back right away. When a manipulator stops explaining himself, it usually means he is changing tactics. At noon, Marcus forwarded me an email that made my stomach drop. Subject notice of potential civil action. Evan had retained counsel. Not just any counsel, a high-profile litigation firm known for one thing, intimidation. He is going nuclear, Marcus said over the phone. This is not about winning. It is about exhausting you. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. The old panic tried to crawl up my spine. The familiar urge to smooth things over, to step back, to let someone else take the heat so everyone could calm down. That urge had shaped most of my adult life. Not today. What is his angle, I asked. They are alleging defamation, Marcus said. They are framing you as a disgruntled employee with mental health issues. Of course they were. He wants to flip the narrative, Marcus continued. Make you look unstable before the evidence goes public. I exhaled slowly. Then we go public first. There was a pause on the line. That will hurt your parents, Marcus said carefully. I closed my eyes. He is already hurting them. He is just doing it behind their backs. That afternoon I met with a journalist I trusted. A woman in her early 60s who had built her career on exposing financial abuse inside families. She listened the way seasoned women do, without interrupting, without gasping. When I finished, she leaned back and said, "This is not just a workplace story." No, I agreed. It is about inheritance manipulation. She nodded. Older readers will understand that. The article would not run immediately. Verification took time. But once it did, it would not be something Evan could spin away with a single press release. That evening, my father came to my apartment. He stood in the doorway like he did not know if he was welcome. I stepped aside and let him in. He did not sit, he paced. "I raised you both," he said finally. "I taught you right from wrong." I folded my arms. "Then you need to accept that one of us ignored the lesson." He stopped pacing and looked at me, really looked at me. "I should have listened to you," he said quietly. The admission felt heavier than an apology. "He always seemed so capable," my father continued, "so calm. And you were always intense." I smiled sadly. Intense is what people call women who notice things. He nodded slowly. "I let him speak for you." "Yes," I said, "you did." He swallowed. "I will fix what I can." I believed him, and I did not. Because some damage cannot be fixed, it can only be acknowledged. The next morning, the article went live. The headline did not mention my name. It mentioned elder financial abuse. By noon, my phone would not stop ringing. Old colleagues, former clients, a cousin I had not spoken to in years, and Evan. I did not answer. Instead, I watched the numbers climb. Shares, comments, women telling their own stories in the replies, about sons who helped too much, about daughters labeled difficult when they asked questions. By late afternoon, Farewell and Knox released a statement. They were cooperating with an independent investigation. Evan's name was not mentioned, but it did not need to be. That night, my mother called. "I do not recognize him," she whispered. "He says you are trying to destroy him." I closed my eyes. "No, I am refusing to let him destroy us quietly," she cried, and I let her. Because grief needs space to land. Evan sent one last message that night. "You think people will still see you the same after this?" I typed back slowly. "I'm not who you wanted me to be." That was the point. I put my phone down and stood by the window watching the city lights blink on one by one. For years, I had been the family's stabilizer, the one who smoothed things over, the one who absorbed tension so others could stay comfortable. Evan had counted on that. But stability without truth is just another form of silence. And silence I had learned the hard way is a currency manipulators spend freely. Tomorrow the lawyers would speak. Tomorrow my family would fracture further before it healed. But tonight I felt something I had not felt since this began. Not relief. Resolve. The morning after the article ran, my name stopped feeling like it belonged to me. It was everywhere, whispered in emails passed along in texts, wrapped in careful language that pretended neutrality, while quietly choosing sides. People did not say Olivia is right or Olivia is wrong. They said things like complicated, unfortunate, sensitive family matter. Those words are how people avoid accountability. I woke early and drove to the office of the independent counsel Farewell and Knox had hired. The building was sterile, all glass and gray carpeting designed to feel objective. Inside, truth was being weighed not by morality but by liability. I sat across from a woman who looked to be in her late 50s. She had calm eyes and the kind of posture that came from decades of listening to men explain away their behavior. "Ms. Reed," she said, using my professional name, "we have reviewed the materials you provided." I nodded, hands folded in my lap. I had learned long ago that stillness unnerved people more than anger. "The audio manipulation is clear," she continued. "So is the payment trail." She paused. "What is less clear is motive." I leaned forward slightly. "Inheritance." She raised an eyebrow. "My brother positioned himself as the family's financial guardian," I said. "He redirected assets while discrediting the only person who could challenge him." Silence. Then she nodded once. "That aligns with what we are seeing." When I left the building, the sun felt too bright, the street too loud. This was no longer theoretical. Systems were moving, consequences were aligning. My phone buzzed, a message from my mother. "He says he will leave town if this continues." I stared at the words. That was new. Evan had never retreated before. He escalated. He reframed. He waited for people to tire. Leaving town meant one of two things. He was panicking, or he was planning something bigger. I drove to my parents' house. The front door was open. Boxes lined the hallway. My mother sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug she was not drinking from. "He packed," she said when she saw me. "He said he needs space." "From whom?" I asked. She looked up at me, eyes rimmed red. "From you." I nodded slowly. That tracks. My father stood near the doorway, arms crossed, watching the boxes like they might explode. He looked older than he had a week ago. "He says you turned everyone against him," my mother whispered. "No," I said gently. "He did that when he wrote about you like entries in a ledger." She flinched. "I found something else," she said, "in the box." She slid an envelope toward me. Inside were photocopies of legal drafts, early versions of estate documents, notes in Evan's handwriting in the margins. "Remove Olivia from executor role. Delay disclosure until assets secured. Frame concern as protection." My chest tightened. He planned to push you out entirely, my father said quietly. Not just from money, from decisions. I looked at them both. He already did. My mother reached across the table and took my hand. Her grip was firm, desperate. I am so sorry, she said. I should have seen it. I squeezed back. You did not want to. She nodded, tears spilling over. No, I wanted peace. That word again. Peace bought with denial. My phone buzzed. Marcus. He filed an emergency injunction, he said. He is trying to stop further publication. On what grounds, I asked. Defamation and emotional distress, Marcus replied. Classic last move. I closed my eyes, and it will not hold, he said. But it buys him time. Time was dangerous. That afternoon, the journalist called again. We have confirmation from another family, she said. Same pattern, different town, different parents. My stomach dropped. Another son, I asked. Yes, she said. Same consultant, same shell accounts. The story had just grown teeth. By evening, Evan called me himself. I answered. Are you satisfied, he asked. His voice sounded thinner, strained. No, I said calmly, I am focused. You always were, he snapped. You never knew when to stop. I leaned against the counter. You never knew when to tell the truth. He laughed, sharp and humorless. You think you are some moral crusader now? No, I said. I think I am done being quiet. There was a pause. They will hate you for this, he said. Families do not forgive exposure. I thought of my mother's hands shaking around that mug, of my father staring at those boxes like a crime scene. They already forgave you, I said, until they saw the cost. He exhaled hard. If I go down, I will not go alone. There it was. The threat he thought would stop me. You already tried that, I said. It did not work. He hung up. That night, I sat alone in my apartment with the windows open, listening to the city settle. I felt the exhaustion finally creep in, heavy and dull. This was the part no one romanticized. The waiting, the legal language, the knowledge that justice moves slower than manipulation ever does. But something else sat beneath the fatigue. Certainty. Evan had built his power on access and silence. He had lost both. The next chapter would not be about uncovering truth. It would be about what happens when the truth refuses to stay contained, and whether a family built on avoidance could survive seeing itself clearly for the first time. The injunction landed like a door slamming in a quiet house. It did not stop the investigation. It did not erase the evidence, but it changed the air. Suddenly, every sentence felt monitored, every conversation edged with caution. Evan had not stopped the truth. He had slowed it down, hoping exhaustion would do what lies no longer could. That was when he made his mistake. He came back. I learned about it from a neighbor, not from my parents. A casual text that said, "Saw your brother's car back at the house. Everything okay?" Everything was not okay. I drove over immediately, my hand steady on the wheel in a way that surprised me. A few weeks earlier, the thought of confronting him again would have twisted my stomach into knots. Now there was only a tight focus, the kind that comes when the last illusions have already burned away. His car was in the driveway, parked too neatly like he wanted to signal control. Inside voices carried through the open windows, raised, sharp. I did not knock. I walked straight in. My mother was standing in the living room, arms folded across her chest, her posture defensive in a way I had never seen before. My father stood near the fireplace, jaw clenched. Evan was pacing between them, agitation cracking through his usual polish. When he saw me, he froze. "Well," he said slowly, "here she is." My mother turned. Her face softened when she saw me, then hardened again when she looked back at him. "Do not," she said quietly. "Do not do that." Something in her tone made Evan blink. "You told them I forged documents," he said, pointing at me. "I showed them what you wrote," I replied, "in your own handwriting." He laughed too loudly. "You always did love your proof." My father stepped forward. "Why did you change the executor clause without telling us?" Evan's face tightened. "Because you would not have understood." The silence that followed was devastating. My mother's voice shook. "We are not children." He rubbed his forehead, frustration seeping through. "I was protecting you." "No," my father said. "You were deciding for us." That distinction mattered. Evan turned to me, eyes flashing. "Happy now?" I met his gaze. This was never about me being happy. He scoffed. "You ruined everything." I shook my head. "You built everything on lies. That is not the same thing." For a moment he looked like he might explode. Then something else happened. He sat down. Hard. The air went out of him like a punctured tire. "You do not understand what it was like," he said, voice lower now, "watching everything slip, watching them get older, watching money disappear." My mother's eyes filled. "We never asked you to fix that." He laughed bitterly. "You did not have to. I saw it." I stepped closer. "Seeing fear does not give you the right to exploit it." He looked up at me, then really looked. Not with contempt, not with confidence, with resentment. "You always thought you were better than me," he said. I felt something twist, but I kept my voice steady. "I thought you were capable of telling the truth." He shook his head. "You were gone, you left, I stayed, and you used that," I said. My father sat heavily in his chair. "This ends now," he said. "No more decisions without us. No more documents we do not read." Evan's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "And the money my mother asked?" He did not answer. "That is an answer," she said softly. I watched the moment something fundamental broke. Not between me and Evan. Between Evan and the version of himself he had been performing for years. He stood abruptly. "If you think she's going to save you," he snapped, gesturing at me, "you are fools." My father looked at him with a kind of tired sadness. "She already did. You just did not like how." Evan grabbed his jacket and stormed out. The door slammed. No one moved. My mother sat down slowly, hands trembling. "I do not know who he is anymore," she whispered. I sat beside her. "You know who he showed you." That night after I left, Marcus called. "He made contact," he said, "through counsel." "What does he want?" I asked. "To settle." I closed my eyes. "On what terms?" I asked. "He wants the story contained. He wants the estate issues handled privately. He wants your silence." I laughed short and sharp. "Of course he does." Marcus hesitated. "It would be easier." "There it is," I said. "The lie families always tell themselves." "What do you want?" he asked. I thought about my mother's shaking hands, about my father finally asking questions, about all the women who had written after the article thanking me for saying what they never could. "I want it on record," I said. "I want the documents corrected. I want accountability." "And revenge?" Marcus asked gently. I paused. "Revenge is him losing control," I said. "Justice is everyone seeing how." The next morning the journalist called again. "We are running a follow-up," she said, "with names." I did not hesitate. "Do it." By afternoon, Evan's settlement offer evaporated. By evening, his lawyers stopped returning calls. The town began to whisper louder. Not about me, about him. That was the moment I understood something important. I did not need to destroy Evan. I just needed to stop protecting him from himself. The truth would do the rest. And it was done being patient. The day Evan's name appeared in print, something inside the family finally stopped pretending. It was not a dramatic explosion. No shouting matches, no slammed doors. Just a quiet, irreversible shift, like a foundation settling after a long, hidden collapse. The follow-up article ran early in the morning. By the time I woke up, my phone was already vibrating on the nightstand. I did not reach for it right away. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to my own breathing, reminding myself that whatever came next was no longer mine to control. That was the strangest part of all this. For the first time since this began, I did not feel responsible for managing the outcome. The headline named the pattern: Elder Financial Abuse Within Families, Manipulation Through Trust, Synthetic Audio Used to Discredit Dissenting Relatives. Evan's name was there not as a monster, not as a caricature, but as what he truly was, a man who believed proximity gave him permission. By the time I sat up and checked my phone, there were dozens of messages, some from people I barely knew, others from people I thought I had lost years ago, and one from my father. "Can you come over today?" I arrived at my parents' house in the late afternoon. The curtains were open sunlight, pouring in as if they had decided there was no point hiding anymore. My mother sat at the dining table with a stack of papers spread in front of her. Real ones this time. Corrected drafts, notes in her own handwriting. She looked tired, but there was something else in her posture. Resolve. "We met with the attorney this morning," she said. My father nodded, without Evan. I took a seat slowly, and "The documents are being reversed," my father said. Everything he changed without disclosure. My chest tightened, not with triumph, with grief for how long it had taken. "And the executor role?" I asked. My mother hesitated, then met my eyes. "We want you." The room went quiet. "I do not have to," I said carefully. "We know," she replied, "but we trust you." Trust. The word felt fragile in my mouth. "I will help," I said. "But we do it transparently. No shortcuts, no secrets." My father nodded immediately, agreed. A knock sounded at the door. All three of us froze. I stood before either of them could move and opened it. Evan stood on the porch. He looked different. Not unkempt, but smaller, like someone who had lost the benefit of believing he could talk his way out of anything. He did not smile. "I saw the article," he said. "I assumed you would," I replied. "I am being investigated," he said flatly. I stepped aside, letting him see our parents behind me, seated together, united in a way they had not been for years. He swallowed. "I did what I thought was necessary," he said, his voice quieter now. "I never meant for it to go this far." My mother stood slowly. "You meant for it to go exactly as far as it did," she said. You just did not expect resistance." He turned to her, desperation creeping in. "You were scared." "We were vulnerable," she corrected. "There is a difference." My father spoke last. "You will no longer act on our behalf." Evan nodded stiffly. "I understand." I watched him closely. There was no apology in his eyes, no real remorse, just loss of position. "Why did you try to destroy my reputation?" I asked him. He looked at me, then really looked. "Because you would have stopped me," he said simply. That was the closest thing to honesty I had ever heard from him. He left without another word. After the door closed, my mother sat down hard, her hands shaking. "I do not know how to grieve this," she whispered. I sat beside her. "You grieve the son you thought you had," I said, "and you protect yourselves from the one you see now." That evening, I walked alone through the neighborhood, letting the cool air settle the noise in my head. I thought about how many families never have this reckoning, how often the truth is buried because it is inconvenient, because it threatens the image of harmony. Evan had counted on that instinct. He had been right, until he was not. By nightfall, Marcus called with an update. "The firm is preparing a public correction," he said. "They will acknowledge the manipulation." I closed my eyes, "Thank you." "There is something else," he added. "Your brother's counsel is advising him to plead ignorance." I smiled faintly. "Ignorance does not leave notebooks." "No," Marcus agreed, "it leaves silence." I hung up and stood at the window watching lights flicker on across the city. Somewhere Evan was sitting alone, realizing the story he built had turned on him, and for the first time that knowledge did not make me feel powerful. It made me feel free, because the revenge was never about watching him fall. It was about standing still long enough for everyone else to see who had been pushing all along, and that part was finally over. The first subpoena arrived 2 days later. It was not addressed to Evan. It was addressed to me. I stood in my kitchen holding the envelope, reading my name printed in official black type, and felt that familiar tightening again. Not fear this time. Recognition. This was the moment where truth stopped being a story and became a record. Marcus called within minutes of the delivery notification. "They are pulling you in as a witness," he said, and as a counterpoint to what I asked. To his version, he replied, "Which keeps changing." I set the envelope down on the counter and poured myself a glass of water I did not drink. "When?" "End of the week," he said. "Civil first. Criminal will follow." The words hung in the air. Criminal. I had not let myself think that far ahead. Not really. I had focused on exposure, on protection, on stopping the immediate harm. But systems do not move halfway. Once they start, they keep going until something gives. That something was Evan. By the time Friday came, the town had split itself neatly in two. There were the people who had always liked Evan, the ones who believed charm was character and confidence was competence. They spoke carefully, using words like misunderstanding and overreaction. And then there were the people who had been quiet for years. Older women who cornered me at the grocery store, men who had watched their sisters disappear from family decisions, a former neighbor who told me in a whisper that Evan had offered to help her after her husband died, and she had felt something was wrong but did not know how to say no. Patterns do not belong to one family. They repeat wherever silence is rewarded. The deposition room was smaller than I expected. Neutral walls, a long table, bottled water no one touched. Evan sat across from me with his attorney beside him, posture rigid, jaw tight. He did not look at me. I did not look away. The questions began simply. Background, roles, timelines. Then the recordings. "Ms. Reed," the attorney asked, "can you confirm this is not your voice?" "Yes," I said, "it is not. And you have never made statements of this nature." "Never." Evan's attorney shifted. "Is it possible you are misremembering due to stress?" I smiled faintly. Stress does not alter waveforms. The room went still. When it was Evan's turn, his answers came clipped and defensive. He denied intent, claimed misunderstanding, blamed software errors. Then the notebook was introduced. The photocopies slid across the table. He stared at them for a long moment before speaking. "I keep notes," he said. "It helps me organize." "About people?" the attorney asked. "About situations," Evan corrected. "And your sister?" the attorney pressed. His jaw clenched. She was volatile. I felt something in my chest finally loosen. There it was, the core of it. Not fear, not necessity. Contempt. When the deposition ended, Evan stood quickly and left without speaking to me. His attorney avoided my eyes. Outside, the sky was low and gray, threatening rain. I stood on the courthouse steps longer than I needed to, breathing in the damp air like it was proof of something real. That night, my father called. "I testified today," he said. I closed my eyes. "How did it go?" "I told the truth," he said quietly. "All of it." We sat in silence for a moment. "I failed you," he said finally. The words landed softly, no defense, no explanation. I believed what was easiest, he continued, and it cost me my daughter. I swallowed. It cost us time, I said, not each other. That was the truth, the only one that mattered now. By Sunday, the firm issued its formal correction. They acknowledged the manipulation. They apologized for the damage to my reputation. They reinstated my position with full authority and offered a partnership track. I stared at the email for a long time before closing it. It was not the victory I had imagined. It was quieter, heavier. The town reacted the way small towns always do when myths collapse. Slowly, reluctantly, then all at once. Evan stopped going out. His house went dark. His car stayed parked. My mother told me he had stopped calling. I think he is waiting, she said. For what I asked. For someone to save him, she replied. No one did. The criminal charges were filed the following week. Fraud, forgery, digital impersonation, financial exploitation. When the news broke, my phone stayed silent. Not because no one cared. Because there was nothing left to say. That night I sat alone in my apartment, the city humming outside, and thought about the woman I had been before this started, the one who smoothed things over, the one who believed love meant patience without limits. I was not that woman anymore. I had learned that silence is not peace, it is permission, and permission once given is hard to take back. But I had taken it back. Not with rage, with records, with witnesses, with the steady refusal to disappear. The trial would come, the fallout would linger, but the most important part was already done. The story was no longer his to tell. And neither was my life. The trial did not feel dramatic the way television promised it would. There were no gasps, no sudden confessions, no climactic speeches that neatly wrapped everything in a bow. Instead, there were fluorescent lights, hard chairs, and long stretches of waiting where nothing happened except the slow realization that this was real and irreversible. I sat in the hallway outside the courtroom on the first morning, my hands folded in my lap, listening to the muted sounds of voices through thick doors. Somewhere inside, my brother was sitting at a table reserved for defendants, no longer protected by charm or family loyalty. My mother sat beside me. She had insisted on coming, even though I told her she did not have to. I need to see it, she said. I need to stop pretending it will go away if I do not look. She looked smaller than she used to, but steadier too, like someone who had finally stopped bracing for impact and accepted the fall. My father arrived later and sat on my other side. He did not speak much. Every now and then he would glance at me like he was checking that I was still there. When the doors opened and we were called inside, Evan was already seated. He did not turn around. That, more than anything else, told me how far he had fallen. Evan had always needed to be seen, needed to control the room. Now he sat rigid eyes forward as if looking at us might make everything collapse faster. The prosecution laid out the case with clinical precision. The forged estate documents, the bank transfers, the voice synthesis, the pattern of manipulation. I had heard it all before, but hearing it spoken aloud in that room made my chest tighten in a way I had not expected. This was no longer my private nightmare, it was public record. When my name was mentioned, Evan's jaw tightened. When the notebook was introduced, my mother let out a quiet sound halfway between a breath and a sob. When the fake recordings were played, even the judge leaned forward. Evan's attorney tried to soften it. Stress, family pressure, good intentions gone wrong, the familiar language of excuses. Then it was my turn. I took the stand and swore to tell the truth. The words felt heavier than they ever had before. The prosecutor asked me to explain my work, my role, my relationship with my brother. I spoke calmly. I described the way trust had been used as a tool, how concern had been weaponized, how silence had been mistaken for consent. When they played the audio again, I listened without flinching. That is not my voice, I said clearly. It is a model trained on it. Why would someone do that, the prosecutor asked. I looked across the room at Evan for the first time. To remove the one person who could challenge him, I said, without appearing to. Evan's attorney objected. The judge overruled. When cross-examination came, the questions were sharper. Isn't it true, the attorney asked, that you and your brother have always had tension? Yes, I replied. Isn't it possible this is a family dispute exaggerated into something more? I shook my head. Family disputes do not involve forged signatures and synthetic audio. A ripple moved through the courtroom. By the time I stepped down, my legs felt weak, but my mind was clear. I had said what needed to be said. The verdict came faster than I expected. Guilty on multiple counts. Not all of them, but enough. Enough to strip Evan of the narrative he had built around himself. Enough to leave a permanent record that no amount of charm could erase. When the judge read the sentence, my mother closed her eyes. My father stared straight ahead. Evan finally turned and looked at me. There was anger there, and something else. Regret, maybe, or the realization that control once lost does not return. He did not speak. He was led away quietly like someone who had run out of words. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. Cameras, microphones, questions I had no interest in answering. I kept my head down and walked past them. That evening, we gathered at my parents' house. No celebration, no toasts, just soup warming on the stove and 3 people sitting at a table that felt different now. "I do not feel victorious," my mother said softly. "I know," I replied. "I feel empty." "That will pass," I said. "What comes next is rebuilding." My father nodded, and listening. We sat in silence for a while. Then my mother reached for my hand. "You were brave," she said, "even when it cost you." I squeezed back. I was tired of being erased. That night alone in my apartment, I lay awake thinking about everything that had changed. The job would continue. The firm would move on. The town would gossip and eventually find something else to talk about. But inside me, something fundamental had shifted. I no longer felt responsible for keeping the peace at my own expense. I no longer believed that love required endurance without boundaries. I had seen what happened when silence was mistaken for virtue, and I had chosen finally to speak. The story was not over, but it was no longer being written without me. 3 months after the trial, the house felt quieter than it ever had. Not the hollow silence of avoidance or grief, but the kind that settles after a storm has passed and everything damaged has been dragged into the light. I sat at my parents' kitchen table early one morning, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had already gone cold, watching sunlight creep slowly across the floor. This was the first time in years I had nowhere else to be. No emergency to manage, no reputation to defend, no version of myself to perform so others could stay comfortable. Just me. My mother moved slowly around the kitchen, softer in her movements now. She no longer rushed to fill space with noise or tasks. My father sat by the window reading the paper, occasionally glancing up like he still expected someone to burst through the door and shatter the calm. That someone never came. Evan's room remained closed, not out of denial, but out of respect for a truth we all now understood. Some doors once shut stay that way, not as punishment, but as protection. Later that morning, I drove into town to meet with the family attorney. The revised estate documents lay neatly stacked in front of us, transparent, balanced, signed slowly, deliberately, with every clause read out loud. No more shortcuts. No more trust handed over without question. When the final page was signed, the attorney slid it across the table and smiled gently. "You handled this with integrity," he said. "Not everyone does." Integrity. The word followed me out of the office and into the bright afternoon sun. It was strange how often that word had been used during this ordeal, usually by people who thought it belonged to them by default. Evan had worn it like a badge. My father had assumed it came automatically with age and authority. I had learned it came from something else entirely, from the willingness to be uncomfortable, from refusing to disappear. That afternoon, I returned to Farewell and Knox, not as a wronged employee clawing her way back, but as someone who finally understood her value. My office looked the same. Same desk, same window, same framed photo of my grandmother on the bookshelf. But I was different. When a junior associate knocked hesitantly on my door and asked for advice, I listened. When a partner spoke over me in a meeting, I did not shrink or soften my tone. I spoke clearly, directly, without apology. No one challenged me. Power, I realized, does not always announce itself. Sometimes it simply stops asking permission. That evening, my sister-in-law called, Evan's wife. Her voice was tired, resigned. "I am filing for separation," she said. "I needed you to know." "I am sorry," I replied, and I meant it. "He convinced me you were unstable," she admitted, "that you were dangerous to the family." I closed my eyes. He convinced a lot of people of that. There was a pause. "You were never the problem," she said quietly. After the call, I sat on my balcony watching the sky turn pink and gold. I thought about all the women who had reached out since the articles ran. Mothers, daughters, sisters, women who had been labeled difficult for asking where the money went, why documents changed, who benefited from their silence. Their stories echoed mine in different keys. The betrayal always wore a familiar face. A son, a brother, a trusted man who said, "Let me handle it." And the cost was always paid quietly by the women who dared to ask questions. Weeks later, on a cool Sunday morning, my parents hosted a small dinner. No extended family, no forced smiles, just the 3 of us and a simple meal. Halfway through, my father set down his fork and cleared his throat. "I spent my life thinking leadership meant keeping things calm," he said. "I was wrong." We waited. "It means telling the truth early," he continued, "even when it is inconvenient, especially then." My mother reached for his hand. They did not look at me when they said it. They did not need to. That apology did not erase the past, but it changed the future. And that was enough. On my last night before returning fully to my life, I packed the box of evidence that had started everything. The notebook, the copies, the recordings. I did not destroy them. I labeled the box and stored it carefully. Not out of bitterness, out of respect for the truth. Because forgetting is how patterns repeat. Before bed, I sat at my desk and opened a blank document. For the first time since this began, I was not writing a defense or a timeline or a response. I was writing for myself. I wrote about silence, about how it had once felt like strength, about how it had nearly cost me everything. I wrote about revenge too. Not the loud kind, not the kind that burns bridges and leaves wreckage behind, but the quiet kind. The kind where you stand your ground long enough that lies collapse under their own weight. The kind where you reclaim your name, your voice, your place at the table. The kind where you refuse to become smaller so someone else can stay powerful. When I finally closed the laptop, the house was dark and still. I felt something settle inside me that had been missing for a long time. Peace. Not the fragile peace built on avoidance. The solid kind, built on truth. If you are listening to this and something in it feels familiar, if you have ever been told you were too much for asking questions, too sensitive for noticing patterns, too disruptive for refusing to stay quiet, remember this. Silence is not virtue, and integrity is not inherited. It is chosen. If this story spoke to you, if you have lived a version of it or are living one now, share your thoughts. Leave a comment. Let others know they are not alone. And if you want more stories like this, stories where truth outlasts betrayal and dignity wins, in the end, take a moment to like and subscribe. Sometimes the loudest revenge is simply telling the truth and refusing to disappear.